where we create spaces where people can have frank conversations that make a difference. We are so excited today to be welcoming Dr. Eddie Moore from the Privilege Institute and Commander Kevin Warren from the Green Bay Public Police Department in a conversation called Where We Live, a Black Man and a Policeman Speak. I'd like to start by having them introduce themselves. I'll start, Dr. Moore, with you, and then Commander Warren, if you would, that'd be great. Just tell us a little bit about who you are and what brings you here.
Great. I'm Eddie Moore Jr. I live here in Green Bay, been here about 3 years now. I'm the founder, president of a small nonprofit here called the Privilege Institute, where our motto is, if you have a lot, you should do a lot. And we work with folks who really contribute back to the community, particularly positive young people. I'm originally from Florida, did all my education in Iowa, but my wife is here grew up here in the great Green Bay areas, and that's what's brought us here. And according to my mortgage, I'm gonna be here the next 30 years. And I wanna do all I can to do as much positive as possible in this community. And that's part of what's brought me here today. I've had a relationship with Sister Renita, as well with Brother Kevin, and really just had an idea about, just bringing folks like us together to just have a conversation. And I'm hoping this can be a seed that other communities will pick up on as well, because I feel like this kind of conversation needs to be a part of the process as well. So I'm happy to be here.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Kevin Warwick. I am in my 18th year with the Green Bay Police Department. A little bit about me. I have a wonderful family. I'm married and I have 3 children that I'm growing up in the Green Bay community. And throughout my career, I've grown, from being a patrol officer, rising through the ranks, and currently the operations commander. And over the last 5-7 years, we've taken a really proactive effort to engage the community. And the Green Bay Police Department has been having these community conversations at different locations for many years. And that's how I met Dr. Moore. And we want to have these conversations because we want to listen. We want to understand what's going on in our community. And the title of today's event, Where We Live. I think people want to understand, people want to know, people need to have that open dialogue. And that dialogue that we provide to our community is key. People need to understand what police do, how they operate, how they're trained, and most importantly, those day-to-day interactions. We don't want people to make those assumptions of only what they see on the media or through social media. I think, that only gives you a fraction of what happened. So these community meetings, we want to really stress the importance of being part of this conversation, opening that dialogue and making sure that we maintain this for many years. And we do this with everybody. And our focus has always been all ethnicities, all people matter, and really the focus on the kids. Those are our future leaders. As some of my friends would say, those are the seeds in the community. Those are your future police officers, your doctors, your attorneys. That's what we need to do. We need to mentor those kids because they're going to take over for us someday as we develop that path going forward. So as we have this conversation today, we encourage the questions. We encourage, some of these topics are tough. There are going to be some controversial things that we have to speak on. We have to acknowledge. We have to address and develop really that partnership and that plan going forward.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. Kevin, you said something in your brief comments about people see something and they react to it, but they only get a fraction of what actually happened. Would you like to expand on that just a little bit, please?
Yeah, I cringe every time I watch the news media. And I'm not, in the news, I don't have anything bad to say about them, but they only show 10 seconds, 30 seconds. But the investigations have multiple videos, multiple different angles, because if only one video is shown, then there's other videos that could tell the whole story. So sometimes the whole story, and it's no fault of anybody's, the whole story comes out in the full investigation, not necessarily what's being portrayed either on social media, via print, or via the news.
Okay, thank you. I have another question just to move us forward. Would you all share just a little bit about the most impactful reflection you have after seeing the murder of George Foreman. So we're jogging very quickly to really the thing that brought us here. These conversations were both birthed out of just a need to have the community provided with the space to really unpack just the distress of what we saw on Memorial Day. And so Dr. Moore, would you mind responding to that? Because you said in the last time we met that you really didn't have words for how you were feeling.
Yes, and I don't know if my sentences are better today than they would have been a week or so ago, but I think of 3 words right now: just pain and anger and love. And I think that thinking about that video for me, that there's just a pain inside. There's something I described as bubbling up inside of me that I can't quite describe. And I'm sure there are some trained, licensed therapists out there that can give me a call or give me a tweet or something to let me know what I may need to do. But I know something inside of me is not happy and it's hurting because of 8 minutes and 46 seconds of watching a Black man die at the hands of a police officer. 2, I'm pissed off. I mean, it's angering, and it's really hard when I have a positive relationship with a police officer and I watch one kill a Black man in my face. And maybe I'm missing something from some other angles, but it just looked pretty clear to me. And what's really pissing me off the most, that what really angers me the most, is I'll never forget what I saw. Like, it's in my membrane forever. And I don't know if I was ready to take that with me to my grave. And so my last thing is just trying. I saw Dr. Cornel West talking about love and the history of Black people, especially in America, and the treatment they received from Americans, still showing love first. And that's something that I'm continuing to try to let be the first thing that comes out of my mouth when I see my brother, who I know is not that police officer. But it's hard. It's hard. And I know this, brother. And so that's where I'm at. That's where my emotions are. That's where my emotions were. And as you can see, I'm still grappling with it. So.
Thank you for that. Often we forget that in every situation that we're in, we're bringing history with us. Like, we have some folks in the audience right now, and all of us brought this history with us. And you talked about the image that you can't get out of your mind now. It's indelibly etched in your consciousness. I think that a lot of what happens in terms of the rioting is that people have all of this history that they're carrying in their person, in their psyche, in the interactions, and it comes out sometimes when they don't want it to come out. And so, Commander, would you mind thinking a little or reflecting on what the most impactful reflection about the George Foreman murder is for you, please?
You know, when I saw that video, I shared some similar thoughts. You know, that hurts. There's pain, because I know, you know, what police officers go through. I know how they're, you know, how the community judge them. You know, self-awareness is probably one of the best attributes any police officer can have. And when they see that video, each of them is going to have their own perspective, own opinion. And when you saw that video and you saw the ramifications from that video, it hurt. And personally, and I'll speak, this is Kevin speaking, because you saw what happened to Mr. Floyd. You know, in the state of Wisconsin, we operate under this disturbance resolution model, and there's 3 phases. The final phase is the follow-through, and the follow-through is basically trains police officers what to do and monitor, debrief, and assess. And that officer, and I'm not here to judge that officer, but you know, training in Wisconsin, police officers in Green Bay, they go through that model I just spoke of and debrief, and they provide that medical attention, and they provide anything in that life-saving measures. That's what I didn't see. That's the most impactful thing I didn't see in that video. And it hurts, because I have the relationships with Dr. Moore. I have these relationships with the people in the community. And really kind of what hurts most is the kids. Remember the future leaders I mentioned. They see that video, and then they grow up with that video for the rest of their life. And they see what goes on in the media, social media, friend to friend, and it grows, and it really puts police officers. Not all police officers are the same. Not all police officers, specifically, we're not trained like Minnesota police officers are. And people, I want people to know that. We will take the time to educate people on that in the future community meetings. So it's important, but the video hurts. It hurts because it's the kids that, and the parents and the people in this community that are upset, and they have a right to be upset. I'm not, and people have a right to protest. We'll support that. But we need to come together to educate each other on what we do, how we do it, and develop that plan.
Okay, and you said that immediately one of your first reactions was you thought about the officers and how they would be judged. I think it's so interesting that already we see that there are these things that are erupting between this Black man and this policeman. Dr. Moore, when do you get concerned about being judged?
I mean, it's a daily experience. I mean, I don't even know what that means. I mean, there's no question. I know every day from the time I wake up to the way I go into the store, to the way I sit in the coffee shop, to the way I order my food at the restaurant. I just don't feel like there's a moment that judgment isn't about my experience. And I'll admit some of that could be psychological because I've had it happen so much. So I don't want to just put it on society, because I know that if you have it happen quite often, that you can, it cannot be happening, but you'll still think it's happening. Right. So I think some of that I can have going on in my own mind. But yeah, I feel like as a Black man, the absence of judgment is not just on, crime statistics or stories in the news. It feels like it's built into the fabric of the U.S. in the country that I live in. And so I've had to come to grips with that, and I try to have some balance around that. But I feel like that judgment, I'm not having too many moments judgment free.
Right. Thank you for that.
Green Bay is special. I think there's something different about Green Bay. Now, this is the only community that I grew up in the southern part of the state. But Green Bay is different because we can have these conversations. People can come together and say, "Hey, this is what I'm feeling," and have that open dialogue with myself, a police officer, and the police officer can help address that. That's what is so important. That's why these partnerships in the community are so important. Because if we don't acknowledge that, we don't address that, and police officers don't hear that, they're never going to know. We're never going to know. And how are we supposed to work together if we don't address stuff like that?
So if I know that there's bad popo, right? Like there's poison in the police department. If I know that, if I've had someone share a story, an experience, or I've experienced that myself, what it feels like. Now, you may be right. Maybe Green Bay's different. I don't know. What it feels like to me, though, is if I bring that story to the police, I'm going to be under suspicion. The questions are going to be more about what was I doing as opposed to particular poison. I just wanted to know if you, in your 18 years, not asking for specifics, but have you experienced poison in the department, in the force, and maybe, I don't know. It just feels like there are no consequences to bad behavior for the police. That's what it feels like. Like you can get hired again, or you can go somewhere, change your identity. And that's what I'm saying as a Black man, like nowhere I go does it feel like I'm safe. And we used to joke around saying, you're shopping while Black or jogging while Black. Now, recently, and with Breonna Taylor in Louisville, now, you see somebody killed while sleeping while Black, right? It just feels like nowhere safe. And so I was just wondering, what's your thought about the poison, the consequences, when I reflect on what you were saying there about the uniqueness of Green Bay?
There's a lot of questions there. So have we had the rotten apples? Yes, we have. And as a police department, we always have to monitor that. We have to assess everything that we do. We have to judge ourselves. We have to critique ourselves. But those concerns that you brought forward, and this goes for everybody listening here or online, we want to know. We want to know. And you have our guarantee that we will look into it. Now, Chief Smith has been very open and transparent in the community about the issues of the department. And we need the community's trust. And if people have those concerns, if you have those concerns, you have a specific experience, we bring that forward. And the process is all laid out, so there's no secrets. And the investigation, once it's complete, it's all subject to open records, if you choose to read that. But when I say Green Bay specific, we have had our issues. We've had our problems, but we have dealt with those problems. And I think that the community expects that. If we have a problem, the community expects us to address it and then tell us how you did it. We recognize that we don't want people to feel the way you would describe, that they're coming back after me. And in my 18 years, I hope that's never happened. You know, I can't give you specifics, but I hope that's never happened. But I can guarantee you that we do everything we can to prevent that from happening.
I want to ask one more culture question, because I think that's a really important one that I've been reading of them. I've been seeing these defund the police, abolish the police initiatives, and I'm not sure I know what that means right now and how that happens. So we were talking a little bit about that earlier, but this culture of the police sometimes feels like anti-Black, man especially. So here's my question, like, how can you become different, or can your culture change based on at least this incident? I mean, I know there have been some questionable deaths at the hands of the police that folks can argue, but this one seemed pretty clear. So I was wondering, like, can this be part of the seed that ignites cultural change? Because as a Black man, my life has changed when it comes to my behavior with the police, because I realized through visible evidence that I can die, right? So I'm not pulling over in the dark, right? I'm putting my two hands on. I mean, there's like a behavior shift. As a grown man, I got to say to a 27-year-old police officer, possibly, yes, sir. Almost like a flashback from the old Southern movies. That's like cultural behavior. Like, I can't be like a man and say, what do you mean? Why are you pulling me? Like, I can't. I gotta have a cultural shift. I mean, I'm not talking about being disrespectful. I'm hoping that's making sense. So it shifted the cultural behavior of Black behavior. Sometimes minimizes it. And I just don't feel like there's reciprocity on the other side. And that's what I was gonna ask you. Do you feel like, you personally, Kev, how are you gonna change from watching 8 minutes and 46 seconds of this stuff? And what's been your sense of the possibility of cultural change? And I mean, you can't do anything in Atlanta. Let's just take right here with you and Chief Andrews, where we live, Green Bay, Wisconsin.
My personal commitment to this community is to have these conversations, to learn from you, to work with you. We have, I have taken great pride in the amount of community outreach that the police department has done. And it's not about Kevin, it's about the whole. It's about getting officers into the Boys and Girls Club to have those conversations with the kids. When we have those conversations in those community meetings at the parents' nights, to speak in with the parents, to have these follow-up conversations. This incident is going to change policing, is going to change the cultural reform. It brings to light how important it is to have this open dialogue, to have a Black man feel comfortable coming to a police officer and say, hey, I think I'm being judged. What can you do about it? Those are the conversations that need to occur. Those are the conversations that the police officer, and you have my commitment, and I'm on commitment on, behalf of the department, that we do everything we can to make people feel comfortable. But we need people to extend their hand to us. And we don't want an adversary relationship. We want people to come together to have these conversations, tough conversations, very, very tough conversations. But if we can establish that, hey, I remember Kevin from the YW, or I remember Kevin, or I remember AJ from working in the schools, or I remember, Timothy from this call. That's where we make the most progress. That's where we develop that plan. We need police officers to say, we're going to be there. We will help you. But we need the people in the community to say, we will try to help you too, because this is a collective effort. This one police officer, a chief, a commander, they can't do this alone. And that's what we need to develop that plan going forward.
Yeah. All right, I said that was the last one. I got one more though. Okay. I have hated the police since I can remember. Just like growing up how I grew up and seeing the things I've seen, I just carry that. I mean, I'll just be honest with you, it's just been in there. And it's taken me years of work to have the kind of relationship. And even though I still have frustrating encounters, I feel like I've done some work around, being able to put aside some of that conditioning of hate that I received since, I say it this way, I learned my most hate in my most innocent state. Like it wasn't something I chose as a 5-year-old. It was just given to me, if that makes sense. So it's taken me at least 25 years of working to get out of that. I see the police, that's evil, that's bad. And so what I wonder though, I mean, living in Iowa so long and playing football and basketball and baseball with a lot of Iowa guys, especially, which are predominantly makeup of the police department. I mean, talking about how they've been conditioned to hate Black people. Like they've been, from the time they can remember, they've learned to hate people of color, fear people of color, Black people specifically, Black males especially. And I'm wondering, like, what's your sense of the work that's been done around that, right? Like, if someone gets taught that at an early age, do you get a sense that some of that is a part of the training that people are receiving to help them with like deep-seated hate? And I know it may be hard for you to judge the other person or know about your colleagues, and I don't know your story that deeply to know if you can relate to some of my upbringing in an opposite way, but I feel like that part is missing, that deep challenge training around embedded hatred that many of our populations get about each other. And then we find ourselves in power positions or colleague positions, and we see news stories.
Yeah, so my story. I grew up with a single parent. My dad died when I was a young kid. And I look to my mother, and I hear many stories in the community where young Black males are being raised by single parents, and that the hate that you talked about. No, my upbringing was completely different than yours. But the point I'm trying to make is the single parent homes, the broken families, the kids that are being raised in the community that grow up with their ideology from their parents or the people that they associate with or the people that they look up to, friends, people that they see on the news, whatever the case may be. And the first thing when I became a police officer, I lived a very sheltered life. There's no doubt I lived a very sheltered life, went to church every Sunday, didn't experience the world. And when I became a police officer, my eyes opened up to actually what's going on. And it's pretty safe to say that a police officer probably goes through something very similar. When they get on the job and they go through and they get the experience of being a police officer and see what happens to them, see the situations or the calls that they respond to, and it teaches them something. And as I grew up in the police department and as I developed my own path within the department, I saw that, and early on, in how we do that, how we have to acknowledge it. We have to acknowledge that is a real thing. And you can't do anything unless you acknowledge it, because if you're in denial, well, you ain't helping anybody. And when you acknowledge it, then you think of how are you going to fix that, right? Police officers, they try to fix things all the time, whether it's a call, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a disturbance, whatever the case may be. But that hatred in those kids only manifests over time. And you don't blame them, because that's what they know. And as a police department, we acknowledge it, and then we look for those informal leaders in the community. And we have found great success in the Boys and Girls Club, because all the kids go to the club, they hoop, they do whatever they do, and they have those informal, those people, those staff at the Boys and Girls Club, miracle workers, in my opinion. All right, the mentoring programs in the community, yourself, the Privilege Institute, they're acknowledging it, and they're saying, hey, let's connect these kids with the people to open up the doors, to show them, hey, this is the path to success. What you're doing right now, making these decisions, poor decisions up to debate, will hurt or will have big effects going forward. So the most important thing people can do in this community is find the community or find the informal leaders to help these kids, to acknowledge that this hate is. But I would then even question, why do you hate? Why? What incident, whether it's personal or in the news, that made a person hate the police? All right, try not to hate the police officer in Green Bay because of a police officer in another state. That's tough. That's very tough. And it's important that police officers in the last couple of weeks have, they've been hit pretty hard with a lot of verbal attacks. And we as a police department will rise above and we'll say, come to the table. Let's talk about this. Let's acknowledge it, like I said. And then let's find the people in the community to stop this hate. We don't want this hate, because hate does not get us to that where we want to be. Hate prevents us and really just causes more animosity. And you given the traffic stop example, that hurts. If that happened in Green Bay, and if people are saying, well, I was racially profiled, well, tell me about it, because I promise you that I will look into that. And I don't want that. We got to stop the hate. We have to stop the cycle of these kids growing up with this hate. And the YWCA, the Boys and Girls Club, these mentoring programs, there's people that came to the protest outside the police department and was saying, look, now's not the time to have these conversations. The time is to have these structured conversations, to develop this partnership so that we can develop a plan going forward, that cultural shift, that reform that you mentioned. So that, from the police department's perspective, we're fully committed to developing that and being in this for the long haul.
So your commitment to developing like the cultural shift, or to create spaces where people are having conversations so that at least they have the scaffolding to build the possibility of changing on to is connected with your education and that kind of thing. But when you all talked about growing up small and having your belief system kind of influence from the family system that you grew up in, and of course the things that you've seen on TV, we know that there is a power differential between officers and just a civilian, right? And we also know that every human being on some level uses violence. Every human being, even from the littlest people, that we use some violence. What needs to happen, in your estimation, for people with more power who actually then can cause more damage with violence? What needs to happen in terms of changing how they're thinking so that then they recognize that it really isn't fair to ask someone with less power than them to actually do the change work? What needs to happen in your mind?
Well, I don't want anybody to look at the police department as power. We work for the community. We are in this community. Police officers, no matter what background they come from, who they are, they are a father, they're a mother, son, whatever the case may be. They just have a job to do. And I don't really like the fact that people look at us as position of authority. Now I understand why they do. But once they learn about the person wearing this uniform, I hope that they realize that they're just like anybody in this community. And they're just doing the best job that they can. And hopefully you're getting it right 100% of the time. But my conversation, going off what you said, Renita, is I want people to learn about us. I want people to understand why we do things. I want people to understand, how police officers are trained. I think that's important. And if they can develop that relationship, if people remember nothing from our conversation today, is we're hiring. Come join us. Be part of the community. Be part of the change. We need, as a police department, we need to match the demographics of the community that we serve. And that goes for all people, all ethnicities, to make sure that we represent that, so people can have these conversations. Now, we can be fully committed to community engagement and developing that trust. But sometimes if, certain police officers say certain things, it holds more credence. And we want people to know that, we acknowledge that, and we want people to feel comfortable having these conversations.
All righty, so what we haven't talked about is really just the national unrest that seeing the death of the murder of George Floyd on TV caused, and then the rioting that ensued, and all of the conversations about how awful the rioters were. And so Martin Luther King talked about riot being the language of the unheard. And we know that across the United States in the last, in several decades, people have been trying to peacefully protest. We know that the football Kaepernick, that he took a knee, and that was responded with fairly violently in terms of his livelihood taken away from him. And I think that there have been tons of other situations where people said, we're going to get to know the police. We're going to try to take some time and get to know the officers in our community. And then we are going to kind of see what they had to offer. And there were no results. And so if the evidence of people not being heard is shown up across the national landscape in the form of rioting, then what actually needs to happen? And Dr. Moore, I'll start with you, for people to be listened to differently, because people can hear you but not really be listening. And so what needs to happen different so that the people that are talking that actually then are heard, so that they behave differently, or that the folks that have the power behave differently?
Yeah. Now, I mean, I feel if you look at the landscape of what is happening across the nation, I think in percentages, it feels to me, and what I've seen, the riots, the looting is a percentage of what's going on, and not the largest percent. I feel like most of what we're seeing is peaceful protests, what we saw here in Green Bay and De Pere, as well as folks feeling some rebellion, as Mark Lamont Hill put it. And the difference between rebelling and rioting and looting. Now, I'm not in any way supporting people burning things down, breaking things down at all. But I do feel some understanding of what it's like to feel like nobody's hearing what you're saying time and time again. And when the examples of peaceful protests happen, like you mentioned Kaepernick, but we saw this with the civil rights, with the young kids sitting at the counters, just asking for French fries and a cup of coffee, getting brutalized and terrorized in reference to peaceful protests. And so I think there's a real unique and delicate balance and dance that we're going to be seeing across the nation as long as we see this kind of pattern of oppression and destruction of Black life happen. And I don't know if I know the answer to that. I will say again, not saying anything is okay with rioting and looting, but I can feel what it's like to be a 16, 18-year-old feeling like nobody's heard you for years and watching 8 minutes and 46 seconds to do something stupid or do something out of rage, out of anger, that may involve throwing something through or breaking into something. I have to say I can feel some of that. And I don't know. I mean, I saw a post from someone that said, if I had watched my brother die on TV, I think I'd burn the city down too.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know if I would have watched that happen to my nephew or my family member, how I would be in direct impact. And I would hope I would be rebellious and peaceful in protesting, but I don't know. But at 16, 18, I think we're going to be dealing with some real difficult balance between protest, rebellion, and some folks who may just want to throw a brick through the wall, through the window. And since we're in Pride Month, I mean, some of the greatest success around progress has happened from a brick going through a window with the Stonewall riots from Marsha P. Johnson. So I think Dr. King is onto something when he's saying sometimes that's the voice that people feel it needs to be heard. And so I'm trying not to be too quick to criminalize, to penalize those efforts, as well as trying to strike that balance with rebellion, protest, as opposed to rioting and looting.
So we have a platform here. The three of us are on this platform. What would you say if you were in a conversation? Because I keep ending up being in conversations where people are telling me how awful looters are, how awful rioters are. What is something that we could say that gives a picture that doesn't demonize looters and really kind of provides this backdrop? Or what kind of question could we ask so that people would think differently about people who have come to a place in their existence where that's the best option they have? I mean, because you have to think about the systemic racism and some of the other things, injustices, imbalances, all of the things that are in individuals that feel at that moment like that's the best that they can do with the energy that's spiraling around them, around the rage and the anger and that kind of thing. What have you said? Because I'm sure both of you have been in conversations where someone just lambasted a rioter or a looter and that kind of thing. What did you say to them? What's useful that we can say to those folks?
From the police department, people's right to protest, we will support. We will not tolerate looting, criminal acts. And my message to answer your question is, if you want to be part of the change, come to the table, find the people in the community that we can have these conversations, and let's work together to do and to change. And when I use the word change, maybe things don't need to be changed. Maybe it's more education. Maybe we do need to improve. We should always be improving. Change scares people, and we're not afraid of that. And you have our commitment that if we need to change, we will. We will work. But when people have that anger and that feeling like that's how they're going to be heard, you can do that. You can be heard. You can be heard in multiple different ways. And I know you mentioned the word options. We'll give you that. We'll give you that platform. We'll give you that structure to be heard. That's the Green Bay Police Department's commitment to you, to anybody. But we can't, and we won't support any riot or like violent protests. That's not Green Bay. And I'll give you an example. The day after the marathon got looted, the organizers, the informal leaders, the people that know what Green Bay is, came back and helped clean that up. That shows the people are vested in this community, that they care. And that, going back to your very first question, impactful reflection. I'll never forget that for my entire career. But I understand why people are mad. I understand why they're pissed. But there's a structure, there's a place, there are people like Dr. Moore, and I could name 5 other people that they can go and say, I'm pissed, I want to do this, this, and this. And they're going to say, let's take a step back. Let's have a more productive conversation, because the greater good will prevail than a criminal act.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to what Kevin was referencing earlier. Sometimes the news report is a small snippet. It's a small picture of what's really happening. And I am not, again, in support of any kind of violence or criminal activity involved in protest rebellion, but I think sometimes that picture seems to be the same loop that sometimes can give the people the picture that that's what's going on in the streets. And that's what I would say to people. Let's be sure you understand what's really happening. Where I mean, I don't know what the percentages are, but I think in all that I've seen, that violence, that looting, that rioting is a small percentage of what people are really doing. And we saw that right here in Green Bay, where some people participated in some stuff that was criminal and unhealthy and violent and destructive. But I want to give just a little 17-year-old Eddie Moore Jr. note that, damn, just think about what it must be like to think that that's the only way you can get a pair or have some food is to get it that way. I don't want to lose sight of that, not endorsing that, but not lose sight of that. Some people think that that's the only way that they can eat that week or have something that they couldn't have before. But I would say let's not let those 10 seconds paint the picture of what people are trying to accomplish over the next 10 years that we've seen history of right here in our nation. And I think we've seen recent history with Colin Kaepernick, who peacefully, at the advice of a veteran, participated in trying to raise consciousness and was, I mean, fill in the blank. And so I think that that's just an interesting conversation that we still need to be having as we talk about the rioters and the looting. It's like, well, is peaceful going to really work as well? And I think that that's something that I'm asking people to be thinking about is what about the folks who have done it peacefully? What's your thought? What's your suggestion? Give me some ideas, because I'm willing to follow your direction as well if you got some other ideas about it. So that's some of what I'm thinking there.
But I think we have seen progress. We have seen progress with, and I keep going back to the kids. There are a lot of kids in this community that will see a police officer and just fill in the name of the police officer and say, hey, I remember you. We need to build on that. One day, a friend, if he's watching, he'll know this, but he taught me, he says, you got to build on the day. And you got to build on the successes of today for tomorrow. And that was dealing with something different in my life. But that goes today, the change, the conversation we have today. You've taught me something. Hopefully someone in the gym here have learned something. But how are we going to do this tomorrow? 6 months from now, if this is not in the news, are people still going to come to the table? I challenge you, and hopefully this conversation inspires you to be at the table in a year from now, a year, 2 years from now, because change does not happen overnight. And improving, we should always continuously improve, whether it's personally or professionally. How are we going to do that? I don't think anybody's got the answer. But the first key is dialogue. Then what are we doing? Ask yourself in the community, what are you doing for your community? What are you personally doing to make change affecting the community? If you can't say in your mind what you're doing or have an answer, then maybe you should reevaluate yourself. And that goes for the police officers listening to this too. Police officers here in Green Bay, they're making a difference. I know they are. They wouldn't be wearing the uniform if they didn't. Do we have work to do? Absolutely. But the progress we're making is in our community trust. Now, we have established a working relationship with these organizers that want to protest. And we help, we facilitate, even to some internal backlash of like, why are we facilitating this? Because it's the right thing to do. I understand people have an opinion on that, but that's the right thing to do. People can protest. We got no problem with that. But we just ask for it to be peaceful. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's, for me, thinking about what you had said about what people can do, what 1 year from now, 10 years from now, reflecting back on police training, um, community progress around these issues. I mean, so much has changed. I think for me, what's helped me to grow around some of my biases, implicit, explicit, small mindset framework around other groups of people, particularly police, has been, as you mentioned earlier, an admittance that that's the case. I mean, I'm not sure if it's even safe admitting that publicly, but I know that in order to get better, you gotta say something's wrong.
Right. And we will help. We will help. We just gotta do it.
And so what I'm saying is, in the case of bias and policing, that if there are bad police, there's got to be a willing to admit to that, right? There got to be consequences to that. And I think that what I'm wondering is, what is it that people are protesting? Is it George Floyd? And let's not forget, it wasn't just George Floyd. It was Breonna Taylor. It was Ahmaud Arbery. It was the lady calling the police on the guy watching birds in the park. Like, it's been like, So when I think about like how I got convinced that this could be something bad, it's like there was experiences that people were having. It wasn't just urban legend that police are bad. And so I think, have things progressed? Have things gotten better? I hope so.
I hope so too.
But I do think, for me, if we're going to be dealing with the kind of issues that we're grappling with today around policing, Black people, Black men especially, there's been a real history that hasn't been positive. There hasn't been an open willingness to trust on my side, because I feel like I've always been under attack. It wasn't a peace officer. It wasn't a serve and protect directed at me. And so what I'm hoping, what I'm wanting as we move forward over the next decade is to know that that has changed in the culture, that the culture of police is not anti-Black, anti-Black male, because people are showing some real evidence in the history of policing originally starting, particularly in the South, of being not so open in reference to Black people, particularly Black males. And that's a kind way of putting it. And so progress, evolution, I'd like to believe so. But I think that there are ways that people can tell if they're biased, if they're prejudiced, if that hatred is still there. And it's not just having one Black friend or one Black colleague. And I think that's where the work has to be as we look at moving forward. I'm going to go back to your point earlier. I love it. If we're going to get better, you got to admit it first. And so I think this is our time right now. This is a moment in our history that I hope we can look back 25 years from now, golfing somewhere, and saying we helped out because we were willing to say something's wrong here. Not to say that we're not doing good things, but possibly there are some ways that we can get better.
Yeah. A couple things I just want to touch on that you had mentioned accountability. In any organization, there has to be accountability on all levels. And I understand that that is a sensitive topic depending on what position you are. And we as a department, we are very open about that. And people hold me accountable. People are sometimes strong critics of what we, myself, do. But accountability has to exist for any organization to show community trust. And I think that's important. And the police department is committed to doing that. Now, when you say that you don't, we have to be open in the community that, that there is that people, the anti-Black mentality. Let's take a step back. That, whether you're Black, you're Islamic or Somali, Hispanic, the police department has taken great strides to engage each of the communities. I feel that I've heard the same complaints about the Somali people at the mosque, how they feel like officers look at them like they hear on all the crazy stuff that's happened around the world, you know. And we bring police officers into the mosque to learn. Equally important, though, the people in the Somali community invite us in. That's what I challenge this community to do. I challenge them to invite the police department in to learn, right? And we might not always agree, but at least you give us the chance to have that dialogue, to understand what's going forward. You know, keeping going on the police department, you know, the LGBTQ community, you know, most people, you know, I would say most people, but we have a pride team to help address the concerns from the LGBTQ community, to understand, you know, what your pronouns are. I'm still learning here too. I'm not pretending to know everything, but it's our commitment to the cultural reform, or the commitment to be diverse and inclusive as a department, because that's what the community expects us. You know, going back to what we said earlier about trying to, you know, create a department and staff a department to match the community that we serve. That's important. That's important for, you know, the trust that we as a police department we try to get every day. Now, you when I say you, I mean, I'm just talking about the scenarios. Police officers, you know, every contact that they go on is something special, because that person, usually in their worst day of their life, is having a conversation with a police officer. They're going to remember that conversation. So that black male having that conversation with that police officer, it may be their first contact. The way that police officer treats them with respect, human dignity, being fair, being open, they're going to remember that. If it's anything other than that, that's going to be detrimental, not only to that person, but to the police department. So my point, and I'll wrap it up, is that we as a department have to be open to hearing these things. We have to be dedicated to having every contact develop that trust, because when that rioting and looting occurred, that tore this community. There was a tear there, you know, that pulled at the heartstrings of many people, because they, you know, like I said, that's not Green Bay. Those people came back and they helped. They were part of the solution. And that's what I really want to stress going forward. Be part of the solution. People can be mad, people can be protest, but be willing to come to the table and saying, this is what I want to do.
So you danced around, or we went back and forth. We did some ping ponging and reform. You talked real briefly about just like the kind of reform that's needed. And one of the questions that we received prior to our time here had a question about stumbling blocks to reform in the police department. And so I wanted to get that question into the conversation. And so they asked what to do. They asked what should be done about the two large stumbling blocks to reform in the police department. And one of them is police unions and the police culture. So you all talked about a culture. And they asked what exactly would meaningful reform look like in a culture where disagreeing with another officer means you have to wonder if someone has your back in a life or death situation. So if the culture is such that you have those bad apples that are present in the police department, how does that affect the ability really to do good reform?
Sorry, I'm formulating my response. The community expects that supervisors within the police department will make sure that officers are doing things right all the time. Mm-hmm. And they are, you know, the frontline supervisors, you know, they are their mentors. They are the leaders on shift. And when they see bad behavior, we expect them to correct that bad behavior. Now, bad behavior is not automatically what people are thinking. You know, people expect police officers, if they say bad behavior, it must be criminal. You know, no, it's like maybe you could have handled it differently. Maybe you could have took a couple extra minutes and explained this scenario. But we want people to know that we are committed to making sure that officers are doing things. We're teachers, we're mentors, we're leaders, we're there to help. And when things do occur in the community, we have the judicial system. The judicial system is that outside entity that when we refer charges, they are the impartial party to determine whether the police officer's case is enough to go towards prosecution or not. So that's the governing body to determine whether these criminal charges proceed on. So when you talk about the two major things of reform, you talk about police cultures, and I think Dr. Moore and I hit that pretty hard. In acknowledging the question about the police unions, I think unions have a time and place. We as a culture, we as a police department, we as a state, the laws are in place, the collective bargaining laws are in place, and we have to work with the unions. We have to work to have some relationship to establish some reform. Now, I'm not saying we need to change anything. Maybe we don't need to change anything, but that's for everybody here to determine whether we need to change. And then learn about us first. Learn what we're doing in order to say you need to change that. But I think the unions, we have to follow the law. And it would be improper for me to say that, hey, this, and this, because I'm obligated, police officers are obligated to follow the collective bargaining laws in the state. I would hope that the union, and I say that generally speaking, will come to the table and have these tough conversations to understand the concerns that are being brought forward and to develop a plan with us.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking at the time. We are at 12:55, so we just have 5 minutes to finish. And so I'd like to switch real quickly to some positive things that we have going forward in terms of perhaps some things that the Privilege Institute has to do in shaping the culture here around racism. I can certainly tell you that at the YWCA, we're dedicated to eliminating racism and empowering women and promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. And we have a series of upcoming events. We have an implicit bias conference that's happening in October. And then, of course, we're extending this series before the Stand Against Racism series. And our Blue friends have come out often and attended our Stand Against Racism events. And we want the whole community to come out as well. But Dr. Moore, I know that you all are doing some fantastic things at the Privilege Institute. Would you talk a little bit about some of those things?
Yeah, I would send folks to our website right now. Due to COVID, we've had a few programmatic shifts just because, we're not sure how many people can gather and things to that effect. But we are definitely locally looking to continue to partner with folks like yourself and others in the community. And so my call to everyone out there is if there is a way that we can collaborate and do positive things in the community as a relatively new entity here to the community, we want you to know that we're here and you can reach out to us, find us online, theprivilegeinstitute.com, and we'd be happy to work with you. And looking forward to, like I said, having ongoing positive impact, similarly to hopefully this relationship we're having, forming and strengthening with the YWCA.
Thank you so much. And Commander Warwick, are there other things that you'd like to share that the police department is doing?
No, we're just committed to this community. We're committed to working with everybody in this community. We stress the importance of that trust. We stress the community engagement aspect, and we want people to be involved. That's the key takeaway. Please get involved, and we're hiring. We need police officers here in the community, and we need these kids to be our future police officers.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So thank you all today for joining us in this second installment of Where We Live. This conversation was birthed out of two friends talking about what was happening around them and their feelings and their emotions. And we just want to encourage you all that you matter. You matter in the sphere of influence that you inhabit in your family, in your workplace. I invite folks to visit the privilegeinstitute.com, the YWCA Greater Green Bay's website online, and see what is available available in terms of you educating yourself and tooling yourself with the resources and information that will help you make informed decisions, and then actually look at yourself so that you can start to do the change from within, because that's the only thing you can be responsible for is yourself. And so thank you so very much for joining us today. We ask that you join us again on June 30th. There will be an evening broadcast, and we're just excited to be sharing with systems professionals at that conversation, or talking about the language of racism at that conversation. And so we'll have some language experts and then other folks that are doing this work around diversity, equity, inclusion, and systemic racism. And we'd love to see you with us. And so thank you again for showing up today. Thank you and our audience for being here. And we just are appreciative of having this opportunity to grow Green Bay. Alrighty, thank you guys so much.
All right. All right. Woo,